Welcome to Wild and Exposed, your number one adventure, nature, and outdoor photography podcast. Wild and Exposed is hosted by Michael Mauro, Ron Hayes, Jason Loftus, and Mark Raycroft. Thanks for tuning in.
Welcome to another episode of Wild and Exposed podcast. We got myself, Ron Hayes, Jason Loftus, and Michael Mauro coming to us from Alaska and Utah. I am at home in Wyoming this week. Been on a 2.5 week filming tour of Montana, and took a little bit of time in the midst of that to get out and visit Yellowstone and a spot that I just found out about in northern Montana. And I will be doing a post. I met a ton of you guys out in the field, and it is always fun to shoot with new folks and to visit with folks that I haven't had the opportunity to meet face to face, and just see how things are going, see where you're at. And it helps me to know that I'm in the right spot if you're there too. How about you, Jason? What have you been up to?
I've just been getting out as much as I can. I came home from my September elk rut trip and had about 3 days of work, and then I was supposed to go up to Anchorage, and that got canceled because the season ended a little earlier than expected. So I took advantage of that time off that I had and went and found some more elk to play with. So I just got home from that on Sunday, and now I'm just dumping files and trying to kind of get into that editing mode a little bit here before the deer rut kicks in. So
you had kind of a magic morning or magic day one day out of that trip. I think you and Kelly actually did a podcast in the field about that, which will be kind of a short and extra podcast, but you're going to want to tune into that based on just what Jason. I was talking to him on the phone, and he sounded like a little kid on Christmas morning. is what I can liken it to.
Yeah, it was a lot like that, actually. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. So we talk all about it in that little extra podcast. So if you guys want to hear about the craziness that went down for us on that trip, just tune into that.
That one should be a video
Mike?
podcast that should have all your photos highlighted.
You're going to put the pressure on me. I got to get my butt editing then, I guess.
Well, it shouldn't be too hard because I got the excitement out of a text message. Ron was talking to you and felt that I just got a text message from you, and that seemed like you were awful excited.
Yeah, it was really amazing. I was pumped.
I've just been doing the normal thing, just looking for moose. Jason alluded to it. He was going to come up and shoot moose with me, and we've got this crazy snowstorm that rolled into town way earlier than, watching the news, they say this was unprecedented to get that much snow this early. So normally you could get snow up there where we film the moose, and it would be 2 or 3 inches and, gone the next day or gone a couple of days later. This was about 20 inches of snow that fell, and it was just still went up there. It's still the rut. It's still the moose rut. But I was talking to one of my buddies here who is a certified moose and sheep nut, and he was saying this is kind of unprecedented. He had no idea what to expect. I mean, this guy knows moose, right? And he just knows, okay, in these situations, you're going to find a moose here. But when all that snow happened and the rut's still going, that had never happened before. So he's like, I just don't know. Are they going to go seek cover? Are they going to continue to rut? And what we found out was some were doing what we expected. They were in the normal spots, but it was super hard to get there. Normally we can get up there and be to a shooting spot within, whether you're walking or riding a bike or whatever, anywhere from 15 to 30 minutes, you're at a spot, right? Well, it took me, I would say an hour and a half in that deep snow. We were the first ones out on the trail. So the only marks in the trail walking out that morning were, you'd cross a moose print every now and then. So you're just busting through 20 inches of snow. Not busting through, you're just moving 20 inches of snow with every step. And it just took forever. So when I called you, I was just like, while you could get pictures, it's not gonna be those typical really pretty fall pictures, and it's gonna be snow. And then the other bad thing that happened was 4 or 5 days of sunshine right after that. So you get white snow with sun. It's just so, I mean, you can still come away with some good images, but nothing, I think, what you were looking for. So I think it was a good call, and there'll be next year for sure. So hopefully, if it doesn't go crazy between now and then with more snowstorms or whatever. But that's it. So I moved to a different location. So you go up to, I don't even know what the elevation is up there. It's probably a couple thousand feet. But you get down in the Anchorage area, that elevation, which is very close to sea level. There was snow down here, but that's all gone. And there's actually still fall color down here. So we moved into those areas. The problem with those areas is it's super hard to find moose. You know, where I'm going up high, you can sit up glassing points and find moose and have kind of a target to go for. Down here, it's just flat, and, you know, basically you just ride your bike till you find a moose, which can happen, but you're not, you know, up there too, you might be able to glass and see, oh, here's a big moose up here, or here's a moose with 4 cows over here, or here's a, you know, you just kind of pick and choose your options. Down here, you just go till you find a moose and hopefully find something that you can shoot. So it's still fun and it's still productive, but it's a lot more iffy as far as actually getting shots.
Yeah, the ultimate in my mind would be to get up there and have some good fall color shooting, and then have a decent snowstorm come so you can get a little bit of both. You know, I mean, if a guy was trying to pick and choose, you know, because I have seen some really neat snowy moose photos coming from up there, which are pretty cool.
Oh yeah, yeah, and you could do that. Would be the norm, right? Get a 2, 3, 4 inch snow, and then it would melt off after a couple of days, and you could take advantage of that. But this storm came from the north, so it brought just cold temperatures, and then with that clear sky, I mean, we were waking up every morning to like 26 to 28 degrees.
Wow.
So that just wasn't melting. In fact, it's not. I mean, I think that snow is there now till next spring. If you look from Anchorage at the mountains, they're just all white. So
it's been that in the mornings here, but it's still getting up to about 80 in the afternoon.
Yeah. No, I mean, we're lucky to get out of the 40s here. So I think it's just going to be a colder winter. And I've still got to drive the van down south, so I'm like sitting on pins and needles trying to figure out this drive through the Yukon might be exciting.
Yeah. You've got to go north to get south, right?
Yeah, you got to drive up towards Fairbanks to a place called Toke.
Couple passes.
I've been thinking about it. You know, I don't know. I shouldn't worry about it just because it is what it is, and I'll have to do whatever it is, right? And this van is not 4-wheel drive; it's just 2-wheel drive. But I have chains, so I can probably be fine. It's just you think about it; those roads coming up, and the other thing about coming up is I came up in, I don't remember, was it May or June? I think it was June. You're talking some seriously long days, right? Mm-hmm. So sunlight forever. Well, going back, I mean, one of the big things up here is people talk about, or on the news every night, just like they do a weather forecast, they do a daylight. They tell you the number of hours of daylight left. So as of yesterday, we're now under 11 hours of daylight. And it drops by 5.5 minutes every day. So you figure within 10 days, we're almost an hour that you're going to lose. So now you're down to 10 hours. So then it starts cutting into your drive time. So then you can't, while you can drive at night, I'm not that excited to drive through Yukon and Alberta and BC and all those areas where there's wildlife rich areas. You just don't want to run the risk of hitting something on the road. So yeah, we'll see. It's going to be an adventure. It'll be fun to film. And, that's the other thing is it might be kind of cool. It might find cool stuff to film between here and there, which would be a lot of fun. There's a place where there's some stone sheep. There's a lot of elk between here and there. There's lots of other sheep to shoot. So
Bears, lynx, yeah.
bears, lynx would be really cool, right?
Well, one thing that I did not mention is Tanner Perks and I, Perks of the Outdoors. He's a Utah photographer, a great young photographer. But Tanner and I have been on a couple trips together, and we have struck out almost every time. We had a good bear day once, and then the rest of the time we've kind of struck out as far as what we were looking for. And we finally hit a morning where, kind of akin or likened to what you guys ran into, at least initially. Before daylight, there was fog over this whole lake, and we found a good bull that was working a ridge line. So we were able to get in position to get some awesome silhouettes, and Tanner got, not only the color of the fog over the lake, but he also got the pre-dawn light coming over the ridges as well. So we, as happens all the time, you're standing there with two people and you both shoot the same subject differently. So it's always fun to see what everybody's interpretation, what their thought process was when those things happen. And then later that day, we ran into a bear. Had a good shoot with a sow and yearling cub. And prior to that, had gotten on to some other elk. So it was a good trip. And then we actually twice in Yellowstone National Park, twice we had elk to ourselves, which hardly ever happens. And even this time of year where it's a lot slower, still to have elk, or any subject to yourself is a special time in that area. We were closing the distance on the second herd, and who was it that was it Jake Davis that was talking about the squirrel middens? So we got to this patch of dark timber, and we decided to cut through the dark timber and use it for cover as we were closing the distance on these elk. And we can get, to the edge of the timber. We're still behind cover, and, they're no wiser. Anyway, we get in the middle of this dark timber, and there was this squirrel midden that was completely shredded. I mean, all the way around the tree in a big circle, this big swath of carnage where a bear had dug it up. And there was a large boar in that same area the day before. So it kind of turned into one of those look over your shoulder, get a couple photographs of elk, look over your shoulder, make sure somebody's checking back all the time. But we had a good shoot and no incidents that way.
You weren't carrying around any acorns in your back pocket, were you? Negative.
No, I was acorn free. Yeah. And then I got accused of on Instagram of photographing in an elk sanctuary or refuge. I was a little taken aback. I was like, I don't see any fence lines or no.
What was it? They think you're shooting captive elk?
Yeah, because the shot was just turned out, it was almost too perfect. But that's exactly the way it was. I mean, we had it pre-dawn and just in the right spot at the right time.
Well, that's today's world, right? Because people don't think that, they think it's all fake.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a shame that you can spend that much time and get something really cool and everybody's like, eh.
And it was just one person, and we got it straightened out. So,
why do people do that? Why do people have to rain on everybody's parade?
I was talking about this. Well, actually, I was talking to Jason about this earlier this fall. We had just had a conversation because we had gotten some comments on a podcast that we did, and it just seems like people are out, and there are people that are flat famous photographers that have made a name for themselves strictly by throwing other people under the bus without having any context of whether or not that person was in the right, in the wrong, not knowing, people will throw out comments about you're way too close. Well, you don't know that that animal didn't approach the photographer rather than the photographer approaching the animal. You also don't know if that photographer is in their vehicle. There's just so many unknowns, and for somebody to take that completely without context, I'm not saying they don't have any context because they're looking at the image, but taking it outside of any actual context of what the scenario was, I think, to me, that is unethical. Throwing these people under the bus, because we live in a day and age where, this cancel culture BS, people are basically excommunicated based on the statements of one individual that may or may not be correct. And so that's why I thought it would be good to straighten that out publicly right away on my Instagram page. And then I also talked to that individual privately and just kind of shared those thoughts, because it just takes one comment, out of context to create a problem for someone. And when this is someone's profession, that's defamation of character, really. And that's a civil liability for oneself. So I think people need to start being a little bit more cautious and a little bit more conscientious about just throwing out statements without facts to back them up.
Yeah, I agree. I think Mike even mentioned, we all spend a lot of time in the field trying to, capture these images and these moments, and it's a lot of work. People don't realize how much work it actually is. While it's fun, it's also a lot of time away from home and a lot of work. And we take pride in our integrity and the way we approach our craft, I think. All of us do. And, when somebody slanders you like that or makes some comment out of context, it really does kind of eat at a guy, And I've been personally involved in a situation like that with the moose in Jackson, where I was put on the Idiots of Yellowstone page and didn't even know it. And it's all camera angles in the circumstances because there was moose close to the vehicle. And, up there, people don't realize that you can actually be fined if you let the moose lick your car, let the moose lick the salt off your car. It's illegal. So, in the situation, the way it was, car between us trying to shoo the moose away, trying to be able to get to the vehicle so we could move the vehicle. And, but all you saw was a picture of, a moose very close to the car and to a couple of us, and so anyways, no names were mentioned there or anything. People probably didn't even know who it was, but it's again taken out of context and all for somebody to get a bunch of likes and to try to cancel people. Anyways, yeah, good point, Ron.
So I'm going to get off that soapbox and
right. We ought to just stop because this could become
we're going to move on to
different podcast, stuff. Right?
What we intended to do tonight was to answer some listener questions. Mark's been in the field and has been sending questions from Alberta. And Jason, I believe you got one from the field as well. And then a couple of us have been able to get some podcasts from the field. So we hope you guys are enjoying that content, and we'll continue to bring it to you. We're hoping to get a group trip here soon so we can bring you some other content, some field craft type content as well. So we are working on that, but it may be December, I think, before we get that done. So what I'm going to do is I'm just go ahead and play these they're video questions, and so we'll throw them in on YouTube as well when this posts on YouTube. And they're coming from all different people. They'll give their name, location, and their question, and we'll try to hit it.
Hey guys, Joe Desjardins here with the Nature Photo Guys podcast. My question to you is, do you find yourself using a tripod less and less because of the in-camera stabilization coupled with the lens IS? Just a thought. Be curious to hear your response. Thanks, guys.
And that's a good question, and that's come up a couple times in the field. People have seen me shooting with no tripod and ask where my tripod's at, and I just I haven't needed one shooting stills for quite a while because you've got, and to Joe's point, he shoots a system that's a lot lighter than the Canon system and can afford to shoot with no tripod, but we're getting 5 stops of image stabilization in body if you have the in-body stabilization turned on, and then 3 stops with the lens. So the need for a tripod, I've shot as low as, and gotten sharp images here lately, as low as about 1/20th of a second. And I've even a couple times gotten an 1/8 of a second, but I've been leaning against a tree when I've done that. Just where you've got an animal in the dark or almost dark, and they're just standing still, usually when you catch an animal moving or something, and they just lock up and just checking you out to make sure you're not a predator. But shooting down to a 50th or 1/100th of a second is, I don't even give it a second thought, even at 400 out to 400 millimeter. I know what Mike's going to say.
Mike uses the tripod all the time.
Well, and I think we answered this on the last podcast. I think, Ron, you and I had the same question. So, I mean, we might as well answer it again. But I think there's a time and a place for both, right? If you're shooting stills, yeah, if I'm shooting video, it's always a tripod. And the heavier, the bigger, the more you dread it, that's the one you want. It's just, you just get stability. But when you're shooting stills, and I think I brought up this same example last time. We were talking with a guy shooting black bears sitting in trees, right? So these bears will be laid up in a tree somewhere, and they're sleeping. Well, you can't, if you want to, they'll occasionally open their eyes. So that killer shot is probably a bear raising his head just a little bit and looking with an eye and then going right back to sleep. So you've got, 2 or 3 seconds. In that situation, it's much better to have a tripod locked on that pose or locked on that composition, and then you squeeze the trigger and you're going to get the shot. If you're hand holding it, I guarantee you, if you have 2 seconds, you're not going to get that shot. Because you're not going to sit there and hold that camera up in front of your face for what could be 3, 4, 5 minutes for that little thing to happen. So in that situation, I say, yeah, you got to use a tripod. But if you're running and gunning and you're walking trails and you're trying to find stuff and there's a lot of action going on and it is an action type shoot and you're not waiting for one particular little thing to happen, then for sure I think you want to go without a tripod these days. The cameras can do it, so do it.
Yeah, I'll just say amen. Couldn't agree more. That's exactly how I feel about it. I still use a tripod quite a bit. And it just depends on the situation. It depends. There's our slogan, right? So
there it is.
It depends. It really does. It depends on what your situation is. Are you shooting a situation where you can set up and be patient, or are you running and gunning? And that just depends. That's what dictates which way I go.
I think you should always have a tripod with you.
Absolutely.
Even on a video or on a fluid head for video, what I do if I'm shooting stills or if I'm going to shoot stills and I'm going to drop quick, and I just get down to ground level, leave the legs closed up, and then just release tension on my collar, because then I can adjust. I don't have to worry about, I can use it more like a monopod. I don't have to worry about leveling the tripod necessarily unless I'm going to shoot video. But if I loosen that collar, then I can kind of manipulate it, get my horizon line straight, and then still be able to shoot, even if it's on that video tripod as I'm moving through the trees. But if I know I'm just shooting stills, I'll pretty much always go without.
Yeah, one of the things I've been, just a side note because it does fit with this, the other thing that we don't talk about very much, and I've seen a few guys doing this, and I actually tried it a little bit in the field this time, was using a monopod for a bigger lens. So it still gives you that ability to kind of set up and be stable while you're waiting for a shot to unfold, but you can also kind of run and gun a little easier. And instead of 3 legs to adjust, you only have 1 leg to adjust to be up and down and whatever you need to do. I kind of like that a lot. I think I might try that more. But the one thing I've been looking for to do that is I really want the ability to have something where you could just grab a trigger or something, or a hand squeeze, release the legs, and drop to the ground very quickly. I have not found anything like that yet that's like a pro grade or a high end or a pro grade, a good quality monopod system. Primos, a hunting company, makes one for shooting sticks, and they actually have one that's a dual or a single that you can just grab a handle and it drops. And it actually comes with an adapter for a camera setup. Yeah, so that's something I've actually considered even doing. It doesn't need to be the most expensive or super stable situation if you're just trying to hold the weight of the lens while you're waiting for a shot to unfold, give you a little bit of extra stabilization. But anyways, just food for thought. If anybody's out there knows of a good quality monopod that, has that kind of a quick release type system, I'd love to, please send in and respond or send us some information on. I'd love to be able to try that out. So
before you do the next one, we need to put in a word from our sponsor. I forgot. I was going to do that at the beginning, and I forgot.
Nice.
So Precision Camera is going to do a new little giveaway for Wild and Exposed listeners. And what it boils down to is you get a free T-shirt with any online order. So when you go in and you make an order, you basically just have to write Wild and Exposed and your T-shirt size in the order comment box at checkout, and they will send you a free T-shirt with your order.
Is this a Precision Camera T-shirt?
Yep. Yeah, it's a Precision Camera T-shirt.
Just making sure. Yeah.
And then if you find me in the field, I'll just give you one.
Absolutely.
But I've got a pile of them. Last time I drove through Austin, he gave me a bunch of T-shirts, and I've been packing them around with me, so I'm excited to give them out. So if you see me, holler and I'll give you one.
On to our next question.
Hey guys, it's Chris Gibbs from the Nature Photo Guys podcast. For someone who loves photography and video, is it better to have two separate camera bodies? One for photo, one for video? I recently picked up the Canon R5. It kind of gives you the best of both worlds. Is that the better way to go? Love to hear your thoughts and absolutely love the podcast. Thanks guys.
Another good question from Chris. And having just bought a dedicated cinema camera, and Mike probably should defer to you. Because usually you're doing video, but if you're out and you're going to, there's a chance you're going to take some stills, but there's also a chance you want to get some video. What do you defer to?
I always go video, with a straight up video camera. And then if I'm feeling like energetic, I'll just throw in one still body and one still lens. And it's usually small because it's just all that extra weight. So I know I can get a better still image from a still camera, and I know I can get a better video image. Although the R5 and some of the Sonys do awesome video. And unless you're shooting video for some high-end production somewhere, that video is perfect out of those DSLR cameras. So I'd say if you're just if you're not selling that footage or working on a big project, I'd just go with the R5 or the Sony. I don't even know what the Sonys are, but
A1.
There's plenty of them that do
A1,
good
A9,
video.
A7 for it.
Yeah.
Lots of
and all of
Sony
them.
options there.
Panasonics will do it. All of them will do it. So I think that's the way to go. The thing I love about like the R5, and I don't use any R lenses, is you have the adapter that has the neutral density in it. And that's one thing I think you need to pay attention to when you're shooting video is you always have to get your shutter speed where it needs to be for quality video. So if you want it to look very cinematic, there's a way to do that, but you have to use neutral density to get your shutter speed down. If you're shooting stills, you don't want that neutral density because you want your shutter speed as high as you can get it to get the still image as sharp as you can get it. So that would be the only thing that is a little harder when you're shooting that one DSLR is make sure you're set up to do that. And it's not a fast process. Even with the drop-in filters on the EF RF to EF adapter, it's just a drop-in filter, but it takes the time to switch it out, right? Mm-hmm. So you could potentially miss the shot. So if you know you're going to shoot video, drop in the neutral density. If you know you're going to shoot stills, drop in the clear, and you're good to go.
That's how I've tried to basically think through and set up my rig, is just to be able to shoot stills is mainly what I focus on, and then when I have a situation arise where I can get some video, I just switch to video mode and use the exact same setup I'm using. So, but I'm definitely not doing video for any other reason other than my own personal use and the potential for some use down the line or something. I'm not doing it for production companies and things of that nature. So I think, obviously Mike knows what he's doing. Mm-hmm. And I would say listen to what he said. If you're going to want to use this footage for, the big companies and production value down the road, you probably need to really think about investing in, a 40-pound tripod and a 20-pound video head and a, something like that set up. And that's just the way it is. So,
yeah, I will say having the C70 is the cinema camera that I chose to get for my commercial stuff. But even having it in the field for wildlife is so nice because, number one, just like Mike just covered, you got the option of using that adapter that's got the neutral density built into it. And if you do that, it's got a Super 35 sensor. So it's almost the same as the APS-C. So you're getting a little bit of a crop factor. So you get a little bit more reach with your lens if you don't use their speed booster. If you use the speed booster adapter, you don't have neutral density, but it gives you that full frame look. Now, if you don't have neutral density or the capability to use it, the advantage to some of those cinema cameras, some, not all, the Sonys and the Canons, I'm not talking about the Reds because they don't offer this, but they've got neutral density built into the camera. So the advantage to using those, dedicated cinema cameras is you can just dial it in. You just hit a plus or minus button, dial in your neutral density, and you can always get your exposure corrected. So there is an advantage to that. Running and gunning, though, and be able to, even with the R5, and this is honestly, I kind of expected Jason to talk about this as well. It was honestly the reason that I switched back to Canon from Nikon, is because of the video capabilities of the R5, the autofocus, the body that you can switch it so easily, and you're getting quality video. I've yet to use the 8K format. I've shot a lot of 4K, but that was my whole reason for switching back. And then the lens selection for Canon as well. And I did consider the Sony. I just, I felt like the Canon lens options were better. I could buy used lenses that were still in good condition and go with it. But that is definitely a consideration. If you're running gunning, you better take both adapters with you. Have one in Jason carries that hip belt, basically, and you could put one of those adapters in your hip belt along with your batteries and your cards and that kind of thing, or in like a sling bag, something small if you don't have a full backpack. But you're going to have both with you if you're using just a hybrid system and shooting in the midday and expecting to get any video. If you're shooting morning and evening, honestly, that's the best time for these hybrid cameras because you don't have to worry about it as much. You can still dial in your exposure and get what you want to get. But midday, you're definitely going to have that other adapter with you if you're shooting a hybrid type system. That's a long and complex answer to that question.
Well, and you figure it out. I mean, what are you doing this for? Are you doing it to make money, or are you doing it for fun? If you're doing it for making money, then you really need to take a long, hard look at shooting video the way people want to see video. So that means a tripod, that means using neutral density, and then you just choose accordingly. The cameras you talked about where you can dial in neutral density, they're awesome because it's fast and you don't miss stuff. Yep. If you do what I do and you're using filters, it takes time, and a lot of times you miss stuff if you're not set up. So it's just figure out what your style is and go for it, and then figure out what your ultimate use is.
Packing both of those systems around, though, you already talked about it, Mike. It doesn't take very long to realize it's a pain in the butt. So I try to decide which is going to be the priority and go from there.
Yeah. No long lenses when you're packing your video camera. No long lenses for the stills. I still take a long lens for the video, but not for stills. I think what we're going to do, or what I was going to do, and I think what we should do is when we get to this next trip in December, when we all get there, is it'd be cool to do a what's in your bag, which, depending on what we're doing, if we're hiking, then that's one setup. If you're riding around in a car, that's a whole nother setup, right? But it'd be interesting for people to see, hey, this is the setup. If I'm doing stills and video, this is what I can fit in this bag, and this is how I do it. And that right there would give a lot of insight as to the reasoning behind all that, which would be, and I guarantee you we're all going to do it different, right? So that'll be something we should do the next time we get together.
Hey, it's Jamie, and I got a quick question about drop tines. Do you have any idea why they form and how some of them will have more than others?
Well, luckily we have a couple biologists on the podcast today.
That would have been a better question for Mark. He spends all his time dreaming about antlers. Drop tines, part of it is genetics, part of it's age. If a deer and elk gets to the age of maturity, sometimes they'll form extra tines or kickers, that kind of thing, as they mature and continue to develop their antler growth. And then sometimes it's just a straight injury. So we talk about it often. The velvet there's blood vessels underneath the velvet. That's what transports the nutrients to grow the antler. And if they injure that velvet, sometimes the blood will start to pool. And when you see the big clubs, a lot of times that's exactly what that's from, is the blood will pool in the injured, and the velvet will repair itself, but it pools the blood inside the new velvet, and that'll cause those club tines on some occasions. But I think that's probably a better question for Mark, who's not here.
Yeah, or, we have this cool thing called Google that really can help a guy in a pinch, when they're on a podcast and get asked a question they weren't expecting. And
Did you look it up?
I did. So real quick, it just supports what Ron said, and it essentially is that most of the time it's due to genetic coding. Sometimes it can be from an injury. You see deer grow some interesting configurations when they're wounded. Sometimes, like, for example, we had a buck here in Salt Lake City. It was termed the cemetery buck for quite a while, and one year he got hit, I think it was on his left rear hip by a car, and that next year his right antler grew a double beam with some really interesting growth on it. And then the next year he grew back to he's still a beautiful buck, but grew back with just a standard, straight beam or a regular beam and no double beam. But the other thing that's interesting about that, if it's genetic coding, then why, I'd extend the question, why do bucks sometimes one year they have a drop tine, the next year they don't, the next year they have two drop tines? If it's genetic, then you would think it'd be consistent, right? So I don't know if that totally explains it, but yeah, it's a really interesting question. I'd love to.
The genetics gives them the potential more.
Yeah.
And then, of course, it depends on nutrients also. So if you have, and I've heard this from several biologists, if you have a spring actually that's drier, and they get more more moisture, from the vegetation than they are able to find in the field, they're getting nutrients while they're getting, or mineral, that kind of thing, while they're getting moisture and water from the vegetation. And so sometimes antler growth is better during those dry years, and you'll have, those other characteristics will show themselves. Now, that's a lot of speculation because it's based on observation, not necessarily laboratory science. But it's based on the observations of people that do that for a living and have observed it on multiple occasions. But like even the areas that we primarily photograph in are areas that are a little bit controlled. So the animals are a little bit more habituated to human presence, and so they get a little bit older because they're not a hunted population. Those animals reach maturity, and I think that's when the true genetic potential can be unleashed, is when a buck gets to about 6, 7, 8 years old. You're going to start to see if they do have that potential, you're going to start to see it. But I mean, if you see a buck that is a 3-year-old buck, not mature yet, and is already showing those characteristics, that's an animal you're going to want to pay attention to, because they may present some really interesting configurations as they get older.
That's a total wild card. I mean,
it is. Yeah.
It's I think
There's a
everything
lot
you
of
guys said is
factors.
spot on. Yeah. But you watch, when you do have the privilege of watching the same animal year after year after year, and you just see consistently different configurations, it's why? What is it? I think a lot of it is nutrients. I really do, because that promotes a lot of the antler growth. But then there's all the other factors that fall into place. So I wonder if there's ever been a big study on that. I mean, it's not that important, really, right? It's just more important to, it's if the animal's alive, then that's the most important thing. It's secondary to people for the antler size. Although antler size really makes a difference as far as impressing females.
The ladies.
I think, yeah. So then those genes are promoted more into that population of whatever it is, deer, elk, moose, whatever.
Mm-hmm. We hope, anyway. I mean, it's always fun to see those big animals, but any animal that's mature, I think you have to respect, because it takes so much to make it to that point, whether it's a buck or a doe, So that's something to keep in mind too. The older bucks that they might be a 2-point their whole life, but they're obviously a mature older animal. That one deserves a lot of respect. It's not going to get as much love as some of these giants, but those animals deserve a lot of respect as well.
Hey, one of my favorite elk is the one we've talked about him before. I call him the old man, and that bull has had some. He is not a very big bull. Matter of fact, this year we found him again. I was able to photograph him for my 5th year in a row, and his body size is smaller than the cows he was running. That's how old he is.
Really?
Right. And so, he's not very impressive when you look at how big he is and his antler configuration, all that. What's impressive to me about him is, like you said, Ron, the respect that he deserves, because of he's still in it. He had 20 cows with him and was still very actively rutting. I don't know if he's able to reproduce or not, but he was acting like he could. Let's put it that way.
Definitely giving it the old college try. Huh?
That's right. So, anyways, yeah.
There's so many questions that come up when you think about all that kind of stuff, and it's just so hard to know. I mean, it's one of these things that I'm constantly asking myself, well, geez, it'd be really cool to have satellite trackers on some of these animals so that we can follow them all year long, and then some way to do DNA tests to check to see if DNA from this animal is in this younger animal. I mean, it's all speculation on our part, but it's educated speculation, but it's still speculation. I mean, I listen to people all the time. They're like, oh, that animal over there will never get bigger than that. It's always just doomed to be. I'm like, really? Is it? I don't know. How can you say yes or no? And to speculate and to be very certain, I always kind of have to lift an eyebrow at that, because I don't know that you would know that unless you did have a controlled population with DNA and satellite trackers and all this stuff. One of the interesting things here is the place I shoot moose up high. Very seldom do I see calves. You just don't see them. Occasionally there'll be a cow with a calf, and it's not non-existent. But then what's good about this year, with the snow forcing me to a different spot, all I see are cows with calves. But they're in a much tamer habitat, right? The weather conditions aren't as extreme. The predator conditions aren't as extreme. So I found myself thinking this morning, actually. I wonder if when they have a calf, do they then go here and hang out here, and then when they don't have a calf, did a calf get killed, or they just didn't have a calf, or whatever? If that's a situation, are they going up to find these bigger bulls? Because that's the other thing. Down here where I am finding the cows with the calves, there's bulls down there too, but there's none of them that are huge. So are the females like, well, I want to make sure that my genes get the best chance of survival, so I'm going to go back up where these bigger bulls that are obviously old, they're obviously able to survive, do I want those genes? I mean, it's just so it's super interesting, but there's just no way to know.
No way to know for sure, but the armchair biology is kind of fun.
It is.
Yep.
The speculating.
Yep.
You know, I always laugh at all the speculation. If you turn on and watch a football game or whatever, and these guys are constantly speculating on, and I'm always rolling my eyes. I'm like, oh, well, if this person would have ran this many or caught this many passes or whatever, I'm like, oh my gosh. But then I found myself doing it with wildlife all the time. So it's just whatever you're interested in.
My name is Jay Grunig, and I've been doing photography for about 2 years. The question I have for the Wild and Exposed team is, when you're going through a park or you're out taking photos, when it's good light, do you keep going until you find something interesting, or do you work with what you have in the good light?
Jason.
I like that one. Yeah, exactly, Jason.
That's a good question. And yeah, boy, I'll tell you what, that's always, I use the term all the time, FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. And you're always questioning yourself whether or not you're in the right spot at the right time. And you always, as a photographer or videographer, want to take advantage of that premium light. So I'll tell you what I like to try to do. Whenever I'm in a situation where I'm trying to shoot, I try to get into the area I'm going to be in as early as possible, where I can, it's way too early to shoot, but I can see. And then I try to kind of scout the area out and figure out where I want to be when the light gets good. Sometimes you scout the area you're planning on and there's nothing around, and then you're scrambling to come up with a plan B. And it's just the way it goes. But I can tell you that, interestingly enough, back to that situation we had last Friday, the situation was such that it didn't look like it was going to be a very good morning. It didn't look like things were going to pan out. And so we set up and we're taking advantage of a bull and with 4 cows, a smaller bull with 4 cows that was giving us some looks. And when we were sitting in that very scenario is when the magic morning unfolded right in front of us. So, you just got to play your odds the best you can. You got to use your experience, your past history, your knowledge of the area, the behavior of the animals, what's going on at that certain time. Get in there early, do some scouting. Scout the night before too. If you're not having any good luck shooting that night before, spend some time right before dark scouting and trying to figure out where you're seeing critters at. And that, I don't think that applies just to elk. It could apply to deer, sheep, moose. It doesn't matter. So that would be my answer. And yes, I'm constantly in the back of my mind questioning whether or not I'm in the right spot for the right situation if I'm missing something. So I think it's just part of being a photographer.
How about you, Mike?
I always go for exactly what Jason said. You do all that scouting and you try to put yourself in the best position possible. If the light's good and we have something here, this is it. But if I get out there and I don't have a plan, and if I'm just out there, for video reasons, I will take good light and any kind of animal over searching for the best animal. Because with video, I'm always trying to tell a story, and I want behavior. I don't care as much about great big antlers or whatever the situation is. I just want behavior. I want to tell the story about this animal. So if it's a cow in great light, I want that. If it's a calf, or if it's a coyote, or if it's, if I'm going for moose and all of a sudden this coyote appears, or a wolf, or what, I'm going to be on that in good light over, something else down the road or whatever. So for me, good light, and any animal will take precedent. I do have the FOMO too, because you're always like, am I just spending time here? But in reality, I'm just trying to tell a story, so it's better to just lock on and take advantage of the pretty stuff with whatever.
I think it depends a lot also on how much time you have. If you're up there for a weekend, you need a subject in front of you, and you want to get the best images you can. So, the same thing that you guys have both talked about or touched on. If you find good light and there's subjects close, you hang tight. But if there's no subject close, obviously you're going to be off searching if you're short on time and just to get the subject. it also depends on what you're doing. Mike, with your video, that example, I think you've got to tell the story. Otherwise you're wasting time. And so if you have good light and a good subject, by all means, make it happen. I will tell you my most recent example, up in that new spot up in Montana. It was a tough shoot because in the morning, these elk were all headed to these bottoms and they were just gone. You just had a few minutes with them. And in the evening, it was tough because the bend in the river where this bottom was in shadow pretty early. I mean, it was in shadow way before any other of the surrounding areas were. So I found myself setting up where the light was going to be and then just waiting for a subject to give me the chance. And so that is another example of, just kind of chasing the light. Photography is all about light. It literally means painting with light. So I think that we all need to be conscious of that. And I think if you have a chance to go see what Jason was talking about in that morning that they had and the scenario that they had, you'll see why they camped on the light. It is pretty, it's pretty tough to pass up on a scenario like that. They don't come around very often. And it was the same with Tanner and I with that bull, with the fog behind him. You just don't get that very often and get that dramatic silhouette opportunity. Mike has talked about silhouette shots and you're basically, if you're setting up for a silhouette shot, you're only there for the light. That's it. If the subject's not there, you don't get the shot, but you're there for the light. And I think that's the most important component. Again, depending on why you're taking these images.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm just going to add one more thing because you made me think of it, Ron. And I think this is important too. Maybe you are trying to get a very specific image in a very specific location, right? So in that situation, you do just need to be there, camped out when the light's good, and then you're just waiting for the subject to show up. And I can think of scenarios like that. For example, maybe it's an elk crossing on a river, or, and they cross in this area generally, but you're just trying to catch it. Maybe they only do it once every day or two or whatever. I don't know. But, that would be a scenario where you just need to, again, it's what are you trying to accomplish? And if that's what you're trying to accomplish, then, yeah, you just need to forget about the FOMO, set up and be there to get the shot, right? So, and I think some of Mike's shoots have been that way. Ron, your shoots have been that way, right? Where when you're doing shoots for a specific reason, that is a lot of what you're doing, right? Setting up and waiting for the scenario to unfold and for a very specific shot to unfold. So,
and you're gonna sacrifice anything else. So
I was gonna say something and I totally lost it. Oh,
I'm sorry.
I was referring back to one of my buddies here in Anchorage who just is like, he's like the moose whisperer. He just you can ask him anything and he'll be like, well, on this day or this week in the fall, I would go here. On this week in the spring. So I guess my point to that is while you might not have a successful shoot because you're chasing light, all that needs to be going into the memory banks because you just need to start storing all this information. If you plan on being at a certain area over and over and over throughout the years, you start locking in on, good light happens right here on this particular week every year. So I need to check that out first, always. Or, I don't know. I just think there's never a waste of time out there. If you don't get on something, don't think of it as a waste of time. It's just information. And if you want that killer shot or if you want that, a lot of us, we luck into a lot of stuff. Every now and then you're lucky, right? But if you really want to get the best of the best, sometimes it takes years to get it. So just be patient.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Really good point. talk about that mental database all the time. After you're building that database, as every experience you have, whether you succeed or not, you are successful because you're building that database.
Hi there, this is Eric. I just noticed on the camera here that I've got an aperture priority and a shutter priority. I'm just wondering what's the difference and why would you choose one over the other?
Awesome question. And I know you know the answer, but let's cover it.
Eric is a friend of the podcast, and he's definitely an accomplished photographer, but he does bring up a good point. And I've heard a lot of discussion on both of these and why you would use one over the other. So I'm kind of interested to hear you guys' thoughts. That's my
Jason,
cop out to let you go first.
So I'm going to be totally blatantly honest with you guys. I never have understood. I've never went and tried to understand what those priority modes do for me. And here's why. Because I always shoot in manual. There's not a situation I've come across. Now I know I'm probably missing shots because in certain situations, aperture priority is probably a good option. And if I remember properly, aperture priority, this is where I'm going to murder it. You can correct me, Ron. But I think aperture priority, you set your aperture where you want it, and then it holds that aperture and it adjusts you set your shutter speed where you want it, and it adjusts your ISO.
No,
or is it the
aperture?
Okay, so
aperture priority, you set the aperture, and the camera
right.
chooses. You set the aperture and you set your exposure compensation. The camera then chooses your shutter speed based on where your ISO is at. So it's still using the three legs of the exposure triangle, but you're putting the priority on the depth of field that you want.
Gotcha. Okay.
And
that's a really good explanation. Thank you.
Yeah.
Because I've never understood. To me, it's like my shutter speed's adjusting. Mm-hmm. To give, for example, if an elk's in and out of the shadows constantly, right? It's very hard manually to be adjusting things on the fly to try to make sure your exposure's right. So I know guys that will shoot an aperture priority in those types of situations. Mm-hmm. Is why I brought that up. But
so you do shoot just manual all the time?
I do. I'm getting to the point where even with my Canon, I know those buttons. I could put me in the dark and I could run those buttons, baby.
So, but what are you taking your meter readings off of? Or are you just looking at the back of the camera and you just know? So let's use that example you just said. So you have an animal that's going in and out of the shadows, but you're shooting consistently in the light, in the shadow. Are you just looking at the image real quickly and saying, "Oh, I need a little bit more light," or are you making that adjustment? How? I guess with today's cameras, with the WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get in the viewfinder, that helps, right?
Right. Yeah.
The
WYSIWYG. I like that. You know what though? Your point's valid, and now it is a lot easier. But even before when I was doing that, what I would do is I would take a time. I would take, if I was in a situation where there was that dark shadow and light situation, I would try to make sure I knew what my settings needed to be when they were in the light, and I would try to make sure I knew what my settings needed to be when they were in the dark. And so I knew if they go if they're heading into the shadows, I need to crank my shutter speed down, crank my ISO up, whatever it is, and I need to be right in this area. And then I would just rely on that as long as the light didn't change significantly. But with the electronic viewfinders and the mirrorless, it really is cheap now. I mean, you really can just start scrolling through settings on the fly, and what you see is what you get. So it makes it a lot easier. But.
So what are you shooting for then? Do you put more emphasis on sharp pictures, which would call for a faster shutter speed, or do you put more emphasis on depth of field, or does it just depend?
You know what? It's funny. Kelly and I were. We could talk. We have talked about this before, but Kelly and I were talking about this on the way home about that. On a 600 millimeter lens at f4, you got, and this is something I've had to learn to adjust for recently. Is you really need to be. You need an elk full size, to be full frame. You need him to be, 60 to 80 yards away from you in order for you to be able to get everything in, have some space for cropping and all that kind of stuff. And when you're at that distance, even with an f4, I think we did the calculation, and an f4 600 millimeter, your aperture at f4, your depth of field, is at like 11 feet. So, I mean, you've got tons of depth of field. I don't even worry about depth of field. I've always shot my lenses wide open, like in my 500 f4 almost all the time. And I've never had a problem with what I need to be in focus being in focus. So to answer your question, I always focus on trying to make sure I have the as sharp an image as possible. So if they're moving quick, I want to make sure I'm 1/640, 1/800, and even that, if it's really fast action, that's pushing it down to 1/640, 1/500, and then I just go with the ISO to get me where I need to be for my exposure.
Oh, see, that's the wild card, right? It's not till recently where you could play with the ISO that much. I mean,
Right.
It used to be where you go much over 1200, it's bad. Now you
Right.
can get away with a little bit more. So you're using ISO a lot.
Right, I do. And I'll tell you what, with the R5, what I really like is on that back wheel, I've got my ISO set up on my back dial. So, I've got it set up on my thumb dial. And the nice thing I like about it is if you scroll all the way to the left, you can set it up so that if you go past 100, it'll go just into auto ISO. So, and essentially, that's the mode I would shoot in a situation like that, right? Because I can control my shutter speed where I want it, and then it'll adjust auto ISO if an animal's in and out of the shadows.
So you're basically in a so they call it aperture priority and shutter priority. What do they call it? ISO priority?
I don't know.
They just call it auto. Yeah.
Auto ISO.
But you're not auto because you're manual on your shutter speed and you're manual on your aperture. So then all that's floating is your ISO.
Yeah, but you're
right.
If you're going auto, the issue that I have with auto ISO is, and Jason, I'm surprised to hear you say that actually because of the way that you use the light. And if you go auto, sometimes the camera will expose it to 0, and you don't get that effect that that you're looking for with those animals coming out of the shadows or with the shadows behind them, that kind of thing. Right. And that's what I warn people against, because if they're going through the trees, you're going to have proper exposure. It's going to expose it to 0.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to take the ISO up or down however it needs to expose it to 0, but you're not going to get those dark backgrounds. So if that's what you're looking for, you definitely don't want it on auto, because you want to be able to control that.
Well, and because that's how I use the light, I always shoot manual. I do not even roll that past the 100 ISO mark, because I don't want it to be an auto.
There you go. Yep.
Right.
So you don't ever shoot on auto unless it's just like, if it's one of those deals where you've got an awesome opportunity and it's going to be sketchy, auto's the way to go, right? If you got a grizzly bear riding on a wolf's back while they're talking to a moose,
chasing Bigfoot,
yeah, chasing Bigfoot, then auto all the way, right? On the
you know
ISO.
what? No, I would actually say
running in and out of light. What I'm saying is,
gotcha.
if it's just sketchy light conditions, the shot is way more important than trying to.
Well, you know what? Some funny, Mike. You said that, right? And I'm just sitting there thinking through it because the part of it goes back to the way you meter too, right?
Right.
So the way I meter is spot metering, because I'm trying to focus on the light that's hitting the subject, right? I'm not worried about the actual So because of that, if you were going to do that, I'd say you'd want to be in what's the metering mode that you're looking at the entire scene?
Matrix.
Matrix metering. Then maybe that situation would work with the auto situation.
I would venture to guess, and this is a guess, but 10% of the people spot meter.
Really? Wow.
I think you're right.
I don't think people even really ever use that. I use it all the time, and it's the only way to do it. If you've got a little shaft of light that's going through a forest, and that's what you have to expose for to get it to show up, then you better either find that same light somewhere else where you can get a meter reading on the matrix and then go to manual, or you better just lock your settings in once you set that spot meter and then compose your shot.
Yeah, that's why I've always shot that way, and it goes back to I talked about Harlan when he explained how that works and what I should be doing. That changed my whole mentality and the way I shoot, and that's what allows me to play with the light the way I do. Right? If I didn't do that, I couldn't be getting the shots that I get in those really unique lighting situations. So
the trade-off for you is you're gonna miss things every now and then.
Absolutely. And I do. There's no question. Yeah. Yeah, I do.
But then the trade-off for the people that are using auto whatever, ISO or auto aperture priority or shutter priority, they're missing the special moments that are probably a better image. Right? Because if you're letting your camera, if all you have is a shaft of light and you're letting your camera matrix meter, it's not going to pick out that one little shaft of light and set it. It's going to pick out the overall scene, and it's going to be too dark.
It's going to expose for the whole scene. Yep.
Or it's going to be too light. It's going to be, if it's dark with one little shaft of light, it's going to be way too light.
Yeah. Yeah, that unique lighting situation I had on that last Friday that we keep talking about, those shots, there's no way I would have been able to get those shots if I was in auto. No way. I mean, it would have never worked.
Well, and I think I do the same thing. I just throw all the meter. I don't even pay attention to the meter at that point. I just know my settings and I know what I'm trying to get, and it can be on auto or it can be on aperture priority, but I'm just going to override it to get it, right?
Which is manual.
It's manual in my head, but the camera thinks I'm all screwed up.
It's funny.
So I always shot in time value. So shutter and aperture priority. Shutter and aperture priority are on Nikons. On Canon, it's aperture value, AV, and TV, which is time value. So it's basically the same as shutter priority. And my thought process, and this is when I was first learning, my thought process was it's more important for me to know what the shutter speed is to freeze the action or get the pan blur that I'm looking for or whatever than it is for the depth of field. And then somewhere along the line I realized that I'm smarter than my camera. I know what I want it to do. And that's when I realized that I'm already shooting in manual. So if you use aperture priority or aperture value or shutter priority, time value, if you use those modes, they're kind of in between automatic and manual. But once you've learned to manipulate those modes to get what you're looking for, you're setting your exposure compensation in both of those modes, and then your camera's making the adjustment either on, if you're in aperture priority, it's making the adjustment on your shutter speed, or if you're in shutter priority, it's making the adjustment based on your aperture. You're already thinking in manual, and it's a pretty easy transition to get there once you get to that point. And I think manual basically just gives you all the control. I always wanted to be able to do both, to set the aperture and the shutter speed. Why can't I do that? Well, you can. You just switch to manual, and that's what you're doing. And then you control the exposure compensation based on both of those things. So and your ISO.
These cameras nowadays are so far advanced or fancy that you can basically just set a custom setting for manual and a custom setting for aperture and a custom setting for shutter, and then just remember those buttons and then change it up at will. But back in the day, you just couldn't do that. So you just had to know what you wanted to do and make those adjustments accordingly.
And I'm glad Eric is the one that asked this back in the day question, because it's almost irrelevant at this point, because the electronic viewfinders in these mirrorless cameras are so good that you just go to manual and just dial it in. You can see what you call it, wiki wig,
WYSIWYG.
wiki wig, WYSIWYG. Yeah, so you're seeing your exposure, and so it's almost cheating. You don't really need to know how to use the meter anymore, as long as you can look in the viewfinder and interpret what you're trying to get. But I think it's still important for people to learn the differences, not only the differences in those two, but also the difference when you jump to manual. I was always scared of it. When I was working with my mentor, I was scared to jump into manual because I was so focused on perfecting this other thing that I didn't realize that my mind was already thinking in manual. And so it wasn't that hard once I decided to just make the jump. And I'm like Jason, I shoot in manual all the time, and I shoot spot meter all the time because the only light I care about is what's on the subject.
Hey, can one of you guys, well, I guess I could do it too. I think that'd be a cool Instagram post, right? I would just like to know what the percentage of people is out there that actually shoot spot meter.
Oh, yeah, that'd be
I'm
a
guessing.
fun little survey.
I know, it would be fun, right? Just because I'm totally guessing.
Well, I take it a step further. Find out what mode people are shooting in, and then the metering. What metering mode do people use? Because I ran into a ton of people in the last couple weeks out in the field that they're shooting their center focus point only, and their metering mode is center weighted because they're shooting with that center focus point only, and they've got that baby locked in. And I just think, what a disadvantage that puts you in when you're trying to compose an image. Because while, focusing and recomposing works great with people, it doesn't necessarily work great with animals, because every time that animal moves, you got to go back and focus and recompose and focus and recompose. And I think that, just leaving your focus mode, leaving it running the whole time, you want to be focusing wherever that animal is, and then use your focus point then to compose.
I wonder if there's a good, there's a bajillion tutorials out there. Have you guys ever ran across one specifically for wildlife? I wonder if that would be worth doing. I mean, it would be a lot of work, but I agree with you 100%.
It would be good.
I think, well, you can tell, just even on Instagram, you can tell everybody that doesn't move their focus point.
Servo is the word that I was looking for. Leave your focus motor in servo so it continues to focus.
Right. Which with wildlife is, you've got to. There's
It's
no
critical.
reason not to.
But I was amazed at how many people don't. And don't think about that.
God.
So I do think it would be good information to get out to people.
What we need, doesn't your Atomos monitor record the screen?
It does. Mm-hmm.
All right, so when we get together, let's do that.
Yeah.
Because we could, if we're going to be down shooting at the place we're talking about shooting, there's going to be midday where there's nothing going on, where you could actually shoot this video, which would be kind of cool, right? Because then you could go over spot metering, you could go over all those different modes, and then you could also go over moving your focus point around and compose that way. And I don't know if people just don't know, or if they're...
I think it's more comfortable. I think, honestly, that's the answer to why people do it is I know how to do it this way, and so that's the way I'm going to keep doing it. And they don't realize what opportunities are out there for improving your images, just by changing a couple really small things.
Yep. And less things to worry about and think about in their minds, right? And
right.
Some of it's just experience and time shooting, I'm sure, too. I can remember... I've learned so much, and I continue to learn new things all the time, just about how to approach things and how to use my camera better. And for example, I've there for a while. To your point, back on the exposure, and it's kind of cheating with the new mirrorless cameras. I used to just believe that, and then my first photos were coming in were pretty dark, and I wasn't getting the exposure I really wanted. And I noticed that I actually need to pay attention to my exposure compensation still, to really try to nail that exposure, right where I want it. And again, I'm being real nitpicky. I'm trying to be on that high end of the exposure range without blowing out highlights, so I can get the best colors that I want. And it's most people, I think, are just shooting to try to, whatever's in their viewfinder they get, and it's good enough, I'm sure, right? I mean, I'm talking real nitpicky stuff here. But if you miss it too much, then you may not get the exact colors that you're looking for, or you can't bring those highlights down enough, you've blown them out, or you can't, bring the shadows up enough to give you the look that you're looking for. But I mean, I learn stuff all the time. I mean, it's constantly learning, and in these cameras, the new technology, it brings a whole new level of things you have to learn. And all the settings to set up. I mean, I've got an issue right now where I know for a fact that and I need to go. It's a setting in my camera. I'm sure I just need to go figure it out. But usually, when you can set it up so that your spot metering follows your focal point. So if you move your focal point, it follows it and it's metering there. Right now, it's center. It's focused on that center spot. And it was driving me insane this week and I just didn't take the time to go through and fix it. I just knew that. And so I would move my camera and make sure my exposure is where it needed to be. And then I'd move my focal point. But anyways, those are just little nuances that just make you faster. You don't miss shots. You're where you want to be, right? Just little things that you have to figure out about all this new technology too. But
that separates an average shot from a great shot.
Right.
If you figure that out, if you have the evolution of that learning curve, you're gonna jump way fast if you just take the time. And you're right, it is just one. I've seen that in the menu. It's just one little click of a button.
Yep. So if you know where it's at, let me know. I'll go find it. But
yeah, it's in there. I saw it. But it's totally the way to do it, especially if you're spot metering.
Right. Exactly.
It's the difference between frustration and excitement, too.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Get home with tears in your eyes, or get home with tears of joy because you got the shot you're looking for. Because going back to the aperture and shutter priorities. What people don't, I touched on exposure compensation and presetting that in those two modes. What people don't realize is that your camera is trying to bring everything back to 18% gray. So if you've got your exposure compensation to 0 and you've got this beautiful dark background, like, I'm thinking of Jason's elk shot. You got this beautiful dark background that's taken up most of the scene, and you're in matrix metering mode, your camera is going to blow that animal out because it's trying to bring all that black back to 18% gray, so it's going to add light. So to properly do it, you've got to drop your exposure compensation like -2/3 to -1 almost to get that same effect that Jason got in manual mode. And that's likely where he was when he shot it, probably about -1. And then conversely, if you're shooting an animal on snow, you get frustrated because you get those images back, and a lot of times they're gray because your camera sees all that light, all that snow, and it's trying to bring that image back to 18% gray. Well, if you didn't set your exposure compensation to +1 or +1 1/3, that image is going to come back and it's going to be gray. Now you can fix that in post, but again, anything that you do in post adds not noise, but it adds basically.
Well, it can add everything.
It manipulates the pixels, so it's adding imperfections to that image. So you want to get it right in camera. So when you're shooting on snow, you're in that white background. You've got to add light because your camera is going to try to darken it. So that's why you have to shoot +1 or +1 1/3 to keep that animal properly exposed, or that subject properly exposed. And that's what people don't realize.
You can accomplish all of that with your histogram too.
You can. Mm-hmm.
You don't have to use that exposure compensator. So if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know, it's just too much. I mean, there's many ways to do it. So don't get frustrated. Just find whatever one works for you.
Yep.
And just make it work. But that speaks to us doing some sort of a tutorial that would be,
for sure.
Basically, I cringe every time because I just know, and I don't know that I could explain it very well. Right?
Yeah, 100%.
We'd get there eventually.
Yeah, 10 hours later, you buy this 10-hour tutorial that we could, someone that knows what they're doing, or someone that can present well would get it done in 5 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah. That was a good one.
Yeah.
So excellent question, and it leads to a lot of different things. But I guess my advice would be as quick as you can, and as quick as you can comfortably, learn to shoot in manual, because it opens up a whole new world for you to images that you wouldn't, or are going to have a tough time. I'm not going to say you can't get them, but you're going to have a tougher time getting them in any other mode. And honestly, this is one of those, if you're going to spend money going on a trip, doing a trip with people, you want to find somebody that's technically sound, because you're going to get a lot more out of it. You might spend more time talking and learning and not come home with as many shots as you would on a photo tour. But if you're going to spend that money anyway, spend it on somebody that's going to be able to teach you something while you're in the field as well. You know, more of a workshop type thing than just a tour. I think there's a lot of advantages to that. You're going to cut your learning curve exponentially if you spend your time with people that know more than you. And that's what I try to do.
That's why I hang out with you guys.
Shut up.
I'm serious.
And you still get all the shots.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think let's just do a tutorial, because I think that would... I mean, and the only reason I bring it up is I just don't know if there's anybody... I don't know that I've seen something specific to wildlife. There's plenty of stuff on landscape. There's plenty of stuff on people. There's plenty of stuff on weddings. I don't know that I've seen one that is wildlife oriented. I mean, it's probably out there. Maybe it is out there, and I just haven't seen it. I never went and searched for it, but there's so many little nuances to those changing conditions. Let's say you're shooting a football game at night, and it's dark, and the field is lit evenly. You don't have to change anything, right? It's just the consistent light throughout. What we shoot, it's changing from the minute the sun pops up over the horizon to all day long. It's a moving target all day.
Right. As clouds roll in and roll out, as animals are in the trees and out of the tree, it's constantly changing. So that's what makes it fun.
That is what makes it fun. Keeps it challenging.
And I've learned to just not even really look at my camera, because I don't want to get excited about an image until I get it home and get on the computer, and then I can get excited.
I don't chimp at all anymore.
I do real quick just to make sure I'm getting what I'm hoping to get, but I do not sit there and go through my image and go, oh, that's a good one. Oh, boy, I can't wait to, because I just have learned.
You don't star rate while you're in the field?
Nope. No.
Plus
I have a rule
so
where
much battery. Yeah.
I won't look at anything until it's on 2 drives.
Wow.
I won't even, and it's killing you because you want to see what you just got. But
that's honestly this commercial stuff that I've been doing the last couple weeks. These guys are wanting to go grab dinner, the other guys that are on these shoots, and I'm like, no, I got to wait till my download's done. Well, how long is that going to 45 minutes, an hour? And then I got to get it going on another one before we go eat dinner, because I want it on 2 drives before I leave. So they get frustrated
You know what?
with me.
Are you using Shot Put Pro?
Shot Put?
Mm-hmm.
No. Not yet, but I probably am as soon as you get done talking.
So if you're like me and you won't look at anything till it's on 2 drives, there's a program called Shot Put. There's actually 3 or 4 programs. I don't know the other ones off the top of my head, the names of them, but Shot Put will take from your acquisition media and put it identical on 2 drives all at the same time. So you don't have to go through that backup process. It still takes longer than the one drive for sure.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take as long as 2 drives, or dragging it to one, then dragging it to another. Yep. So, and then it does a checksum at the end to make sure that both of the drives are identical. So when I'm shooting all this stuff for BBC or whoever, that's a requirement. I have to do it that way. They want that. So they know that the drives are identical. But it works for stills. When I first started using it, you could just buy it and you were done. Now they've moved to a subscription.
Of course,
so you have to.
Yeah.
I think it's I don't even know. I think it's like $50 for 3 months or something. I don't know exactly.
So
but
you just use
so
it
it's
when
going to
you're on
cost
projects.
you.
Yeah.
I use it for everything just because I have it. But the other one that you called about today, Ron, is a good one too, which is that Chrono Sync. But it doesn't necessarily do while you're ingesting. It more does it after the fact. Like if you're like, did I transfer that stuff? Or are these two drives identical? Chrono Sync will actually make sure those drives are identical.
So what you're saying, Ron, is you ate alone in your room all week.
Often.
Yeah. Packed a lot of granola bars.
Right, yeah.
Yep. And I will say, we were talking about doing a tutorial, and I've got my 5 favorite Lightroom tools, and I'm going to say this publicly so I can make sure that I have it ready to get out. And I used images a long time ago. We asked for images that we could do a review on, and the software that we had at the time did not allow us to do that. And we're to the point now where we've got some new software that we're using. I think we can do those photo reviews successfully. But I used some of those photo review images and went through and edited them the way that I would have edited them. And I used all those 5 favorite tools that I have. So that is going to be coming out on the YouTube channel here in the next couple weeks. By the time you hear this, it should be ready to go.
Whoa, you're setting the bar pretty high there, partner.
Well, I've got it done. I just need to go back in and add a couple things before and after, and then show. There's some keystroke shortcuts that I talk about, and I'm just gonna do a little tiny clip to throw those in. But otherwise, they're pretty much ready to go. And those images that you guys sent in were great. I am sorry that it didn't work out the first time, but again, we will be using those images, and we will have that capability here in the very near future after just switching the software that we're using.
That wasn't as much of the software as it was the nut behind the wheel, and that was me. I messed because we did it. We did the podcast. It was just too much to try to manage, and I failed miserably.
It's all right. We'll get it figured out. Because
we had fun.
We did have fun, and they were great images too. That's what. So I wanted to make sure that we got them out so people could see them. But
cool.
Anyway. All right. Well, thank you guys for another good week, another good podcast. I think there's a lot of good information. Great questions on this one. And check out the Nature Photo guys with Joe and Chris and the podcast that they're doing up in Canada. Both out of Alberta, I believe. But they're very prolific photographers and have some good information up there as well. Thank those guys for their questions. And we do have some more questions that we're going to get to. If you have questions, make sure that you get those to us, and we can get them on the next question podcast.
And go buy a t-shirt.
Go buy a t-shirt. And then make sure when you buy anything from Precision Camera, use that Wild and Exposed code, put your t-shirt size in, and they will send you a t-shirt as well.
And they're actually pretty nice. They're not cheesy t-shirts. They're actually pretty nice. They're black. So if you like wearing black.
And remember, it depends.
It always depends.
You've been listening to the Wild and Exposed podcast. If you haven't yet, please give us a rating and a review. And make sure you're subscribed so that you'll get every episode we produce as soon as we drop it. And as always, thanks for tuning in.
We're gonna make it someday. Nothing's gonna get in our way. We will be the biggest band in town.